Okay, this will just be a quick demonstration of starting up the sim from a state of what's referred to as cold and dark. So we're basically sitting on the ground here at the airport. Everything is shut off, including the ground power, APU, and all the internal electrics. So what I'll do is I'll take you through the startup procedure and then get our engines started, push back, and then we'll do a quick flight in the sim. So as you can see, the main instrument panel, everything is dark. You got the CDUs and the lower EFIS all dark, and then you got your throttle quadrant and your radio and navigation panels. Excuse the short view here, but this video is from a pilot point of view, so I view from the captain's seat. So got the forward overhead with all the systems, and then the rear overhead. As I mentioned, everything is cold and dark, so we're gonna just close the battery standby and the bus transfer switches to connect the circuits. And then what we'll do is, getting down here, we're going to start the APU. So get the fuel pumps going. Going to turn the APU from off to start. Hold that. And then we're going to watch as the APU EGT, or exhaust gas temperature, rises, which will signify that the APU is starting. So there's the EGT rising. And once it reaches its maximum temperature, it'll start to cool down and stabilize. And then what we're looking for is the APU generator lights to come on. Usually takes about 45 seconds to a minute for the APU to get started and the APU generator to come online. There we go. So APU generators are online, and then we'll go up here to select the APU as a power source. Over to the pneumatics, and we're going to use the APU bleed, turn that on so that we can start our engines. And now if you look at the screens, you can see that we got some power to the screens. So now it's time to get the navigation system aligned. So we're going to go up to the rear overhead, put that into the navigation, and then it's going to take, depending on whether or not you have the settings as realistic alignment or not, it usually takes about 5 to 6 minutes to get the IRS aligned. In the meantime, we're going to go down to the CDU and let the aircraft know where we are. So we'll punch in the airport code. There we go, reference airport. There we got the GPS, one of the GPS locations. So we're going to get that into the scratch pad, go back, and then set the IRS position. And once the IRS is aligned, what you're going to see is the PFD come online. You got the navigation display, the pilot's navigation display will come online, and then we'll be ready to program the flight. Let's double check. So now we're ready to go. So I'm going to turn on the position and strobe lights onto steady. Anti-collision lights are on. Now these two switches are connected through the logic of the ProSim software to our doors. So when you put the position light on steady and the anti-collision lights on, the doors will automatically close. And again, it'll take a couple minutes for that to cycle through. In the meantime, because we have electrical power, we can now turn on the electric hydraulic pumps to get the hydraulic pressure rising. And we'll just wait for the alignment to finish, and then I'll bring you back and we'll start the, we'll continue on with the rest of the start process. Okay, the IRSs have been aligned, so you can see how now the primary flight display, or PFD, the navigation display, or ND, are all aligned and displaying properly. We have our FMSs ready to be programmed. So you got the captain's FMC and the co-pilot's FMC. So let's get ourselves started. Now the weather you see here is injected into the sim using a aftermarket or a third-party weather program. You will need to get your own license for that because it's tied to the person rather than the actual sim. But what it does do is inject the real-time weather into the sim. So what you see outside here is exactly what you would see at whatever airport in the world that you are flying in. So in that regard, let's get the weather report so that we can set the altimeters. So we're just going to program the navigation radios for the frequency for the weather, and we'll get the weather report.
0 Zulu weather, wind calm, visibility 10,000, sky condition few clouds at 700, ceiling 1,200, broken temperature 8, dew point 7, QNH 1025, 5 on initial contact.
So 1025, so we're going to set the altimeter, the barometric altimeter, and we'll set the co-pilots 1025, acceleration altitude 1000 feet AGL. So we're going to need the barometric 1900 feet. Again, all we're doing is just using the dials here to program the barometric altimeter. 19, there you go, 1901, and oh, sorry, that's 1,000 feet, so we need 2901. 2901, so that's 1,000 feet AGL. And that will give us our acceleration altitude. 29, there it is, and now add another 1,000 feet to that. There we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, the instructor's tablet is how you interact with the sim. So, okay, we have our APU on. Let's disconnect the ground power so don't drag that around with us. Make sure the ground power switches off. And now we're ready for pushback. So again, you can sort of see how you got the pushback options here. Let's just make sure, do we have our route? No, we don't. Let's program our route in. And we're heading to there. Activate that. Execute. Performance initiation. 0 fuel weight you get from the tablet. So 0 fuel weight is 54.8 tons, so 54.8. Reserve fuel. I'm going to cruise up to 14,000 feet or flight level 140. Cruise winds, let's make something up. Execute N1 limits. Assume temperature. You get to choose your thrust setting. Where we are is a short runway, so we're going to go full thrust. But what that does is it affects the thrust setting. So you can sort of see thrust setting is right there. If I reduce it by a factor of 1, you can see how the thrust drops, and then a factor of 2, same thing, it drops. So we're going to go full thrust for takeoff and climb. Flaps are going to be set at 5. The trim setting, so you got the trim CG of 23.8, so 23.8, and that will give you your trim setting for takeoff. So you can see 4.39, and then we're just going to move the trim using the trim buttons on the control column to set your trim for takeoff. There you go. A little bit more. There you go. That's good. Departing, so you choose your departure runway along with the SID, and then the arrival runway along with the star. Transition point. Go back to the legs. Make sure that there's no discontinuities. There you go. And then you double check the navigation display. You got that. Go into plan mode. So plan. And then this will allow you to step through your flight plan to make sure that it looks like you're supposed to. And then there's our destination there. And then back to the start. There you go. Back into map mode now. Again, the MCP fully functional. There is your terrain radar. You got your weather radar that you can select stations, waypoints, airports, and again, all that is shown down on your display screens. So let's get that off. Okay, let's get ourselves pushed back and engine started. Just one last check to make sure everything's good. Fuel pumps are on. Doors are all shut. Pumps are on. Recirculations, you got your engine packs are off. Circulations are on. Auto, window heat, probe heats are all off. And we're ready to get pushed back. Push back, you have the option of either using the CDUs where you have ground service, so you can select your pushback direction there. So if you don't have the tablet handy, all you can do then is use that, or go back to your tablet service. We're going to go to the left, select, brakes off, and you can see how we're getting pushed back now. Let's go down here, select the takeoff speed. So V1, VR, V2. We'll program the MCP. So our V2 speed is 143. There you go, runway heading in the box. And cruise altitude. Let's keep an eye on here. Yeah, and then we'll stop the pushback. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, 14,000 is our altitude. Gonna cycle the flight directors. Arm the auto throttle, VNAV, LNAV selected, and it's time to start the engines. So just like the real aircraft, the start process is engine number 2. We're going to make sure that the APU bleed is on, so that's going to give us our air to start the engine. Then we're going to go from off to ground, and then start watching our instruments here. What we're watching is for an N2 value, which is the top one here, to be around 25%. And then we're just going to reach down onto the fuel cutoff, 25%, and introduce fuel. Now we're watching our N1 values, our EGTs, and we'll have a good start. Once we get up to 15%, you can go move the switch to off. And we'll do the same thing with engine number 2, and I'll bring you back when that's complete. Okay, so engine number 2's had a good start. You're looking at 2246 on your screens. Let's start engine number 1. So off to ground. Let's watch the N2 value rise. And once we get up to 25%, I'll just reach down and introduce the fuel. There's 25, introduce fuel. And now we're watching the N1 and EGT values rise. And 15%, and moving from ground to off. Now in the real aircraft, these switches, the engine start switches, are spring loaded, so they'll automatically go from ground to off. But in the sim, you just got to move it manually yourself. So we got the bleed airs are on. Turn our air conditioning packs back on. Trim air, window heat, probe heat. Do the generators, generator 2, generator 1, and now that the generators are on, we can turn the APU off, and then select the generators and transfer buses as our power source. Taxi light is on. Let's get ourselves out to the runway and do a takeoff. I'll bring you back. Okay, parking brake is off. Set for takeoff. Now, the ground steering is done through a tiller. A new one is on order. So currently what's being used is just a little twist joystick at the side, very similar to like an Airbus one. Parking brakes are on rejected takeoff. There used to be an option through the ProSim software that you could connect the nose wheel to the rudders, but in their desire to have it as realistic as possible, the latest sim software update takes away that option, at least as far as I can determine. Flaps are set, spoilers, auto brakes. Landing, turn off and landing lights are on. Position strobe lights are on steady. Check, all good. Start switches are on continuous. And we will do a rolling takeoff. I'm gonna push our luck here, see if we can get off before we reach the end of the runway. So 40% stabilized on your N1, and then hit your togas. So throttles fully automated when it comes to toga. There's 2 toga buttons that you push. That will automatically move the throttles to takeoff thrust, as in the real aircraft. Airspeed is active. $80 knots. Manual thrust inputs now available. V1, rotate. Positive rate, gear coming up. And just following the flight director on the PFD. So the autopilot isn't engaged right now. I'm just using the flight directors to fly the route. And just like the real aircraft, if the autopilot senses any inputs into the controls, it will not activate. So if you pull a control column or do the banking and try to activate the autopilot, it won't happen. You basically have to let go of the control column, let it center itself, and then you could activate the autopilot. And as we come out of this turn, I'll show you what that's like. As you see, incredibly stable. Once it's in its bank, climbing or descending, it likes to stay there. Okay, I'm going to reach up, engage the autopilot. These are now vertical navigation mode. So this is how you fly the airplane. So the MCP is all working. You got your course buttons, your indicated airspeed, VNAV, LNAV, level change, heading select, autopilot. You got your approach, VOR, localizer mode, altitude hold, vertical speed, all the bells and whistles that you have in a real aircraft. Gear lock, auto brakes are off. Just waiting to retract the flaps according to the flap retraction schedule on your speed tape. And in vertical and lateral navigation, what it will do is it will follow the altitude and heading constraints programmed into your FMC. Ten 10,000 feet, landing lights off, runway turn-off lights are off. And we can start accelerating. There's your barometric altimeter to standard. When it comes to the charts and that for the sim, again, there's third-party software that you can purchase separately. And again, it just gives you, I won't say up-to-date charts, but they have an agreement with Jeppesen, which is one of the major suppliers of aeronautical charts. And what they do is they supply, by outdated, I'll say, how charts have an expiry date, and if there's any changes, they'll come up with the next cycle. So they're previous cycles or previous dates versus the brand new ones. Okay, so we're up to our flaps up speed, so our flaps to 0. Climbing through 11,300 feet. There we go, flaps extended. Sorry, flaps retracted. And we're just going to accelerate now up to our cruise altitude. Okay, so we're on our way to our destination, and I'll pause it right now and then bring you back as we start the approach. Okay, transition altitude reached, so altimeters are set. Bring the map mode in a bit. We've got the navigation, ILS frequency set, we got our course set, altitude set, vertical speed is good. I'm just going to bring the vertical speed down a bit just so that we can lose some airspeed. Hundred and 90 knots. landing lights on, when my turn-off lights are on. Let's get the APU started now. Well, that's a little bit early, so that we'll have it available when we're on the ground. Okay, gonna turn to our intercept heading. Give us a direct course. Under 90 knots. Speed brake out. Heading now to 145. I'll make it 150. Now we're going to go into the approach mode. Overshot our localizer, so we're going to come around now to 183. Actually make it 20 degrees. 175. And as we're slowing down, we'll go to flaps 1. Flaps 1 speed set. Now because of the weather, we'll do an ILS approach, and then once we get the runway in sight, we're looking around 1,000 feet ATL, we'll disengage into the landing by hand. Spoilers are now armed. Flaps 2. Speed 1. Go. Alarm the approach. Landing gear down, flaps 15. And speed, flaps 15 speed. So again, this is all being done through the autopilot. Coming down to 4,500 feet, our initial approach altitude is 4,000. Let's go down to flaps 25. Auto throttle disengaged. Let's get some hand flags here. Autopilot off. And now we're just following the localizer. Flaps 30. localizer's alive. So turning towards our runway. Localizer captured. Landing lights, runway turn off lights, flaps set, auto brake set, spoilers are armed. Auto throttle is disengaged, LNAV, VNAV are off, autopilot is off. Let's hand fly this down to the runway. And just adjusting the trim now manually using the trim buttons on the yoke. Looking for the runway.
Glide slope. Glide slope.
Below the glide slope, so let's just hold off our altitude, descending any
slope.
lower.
Glide slope.
Flaps, landing gear. Maintaining 2,500 feet until the glide slope becomes active. Runway in sight, so clear to land. And there's the rain that it was calling for on the weather report. You might not be able to see it on the camera, but you got the rain being injected into the sim weather. And Pappies are still showing that we're a little bit low, so we're just going to hold that. Landing gear down. Outer marker. Yaw anchor is off. Recall button. Good.
1,000. Glide slope.
Still below the glide slope, so we're just going to maintain this altitude.
Glide slope.
Bring our throttle back a little bit fast.
Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope.
Oh,
Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope.
yeah, I know.
Glide slope.
Now we're intercepting the glide slope, so you can see the approach lights changing color.
500.
Thrust.
400.
Glide slope's alive.
300. Approaching minimum.
Trying to bring the thrust back. Aiming for the touchdown point.
Minimums 200. Glide slope. 100. Glide slope. 50.
And thrust idle.
30.
And fly to the end of the runway.
20. 10.
Spoilers are deployed. Thrust reversers engaged and green. Auto braking is activated. 80 knots. And manual braking. And reverser start. That's up. Actually, we'll call it here. We'll sort of stop right in the middle of the runway and annoy all the other pilots coming in to do their session. Thank you for coming. I look forward to talking to you about the sim itself.